This meeting of the Attleboro School Committee is called to order. Please rise and join the committee in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I've asked the school committee to remain standing just for a moment. The school district has suffered two very personal losses over the course of the past week. First, Russ Marchand, who was a teacher at Attleboro High School and a member of the community, a U.S. Navy veteran who had fought in World War II and taught in the Attleboro schools for over 20 years, passed away this past week at the age of 91. And also the Willett Elementary School community is also suffering a very difficult loss this week with the passing of math coach and instructor Diane Coates-Bergeron. Ms. Coates-Bergeron was a very important and spirited member of the Willett community, and I know that the parents, students, and staff members are hurting tonight. The school committee certainly sends our condolences both to the family of Ms. Coates-Bergeron and to the Marchand family. So please remain standing for a moment of silence. We have not heard details with regard to arrangements as of yet, but I'm sure they'll be, if they have not been published in recent days, I'm sure they will be soon. So thank you very much. So tonight's is a special meeting of the school committee that the committee was set to convene an executive session tonight to deal with a number of items that are appropriate for that forum. But in light of some of the unusual circumstances that have played out over the course of the past week in the Attleboro community, in Massachusetts and in the Northeast, we felt it was important for us to begin the meeting in the public forum so that way we can address some of the concerns that I know have been being discussed throughout the community. For those who are just tuning in, Attleboro had a cancellation, as did all other school districts in Massachusetts, starting last Tuesday. The cancellations continued throughout the course of the week as we evaluated the district on a day-to-day basis. The storm that hit on the night of the Super Bowl and the morning thereafter also caused a cancellation yesterday. And then this morning, Tuesday, February 3rd, school reopened after a 2-hour delay. So obviously, you know, in New England, we have cancellations every year. I can't recall a school year in which there were no cancellations. I'm sure that it's occurred. I'm sure someone will send me a message momentarily telling me when it's occurred. But it's certainly the norm is to have a number of cancellations throughout the course of the year. For that reason, we do build in 5 days in June that we more or less tell staff and families to be prepared to be here. I'm not sure how we decided on the number of 5, but I can tell you that the number's been 5 for at least 20 years. Originally, the last day of school was scheduled for June 18th. Currently, as of this moment, school is scheduled to be dismissed on Thursday, June 25th, meaning the last day of school will be Friday, June 26th. That is the schedule as of right now. That will be the schedule when the school committee adjourns tonight. For anyone wondering whether or not there are going to be any actions taken tonight, there will not be. There are a variety of processes that the committee would have to undertake in order to make any changes to that, and whether we will or not remains to be seen. But as I said, cancellations aren't unusual. 5 days in a row is unusual, thankfully. And so I'd like to start with the superintendent perhaps just briefing the school committee on the protocol that takes place when inclement weather arrives and the protocol that took place over the course of the last week, so we can start with that sort of foundation knowledge before we get into the discussion about what contingency plans could be available if the committee were to act on them. So, Mr. Sheen, if you could take it from there and talk a little bit about the process that goes into your decision-making We've said over and over again that at the end of the day, the criteria is relatively simple. The question is whether or not it's safe to go to school. But if you could sort of fill in the blanks a little for the community, I think we would appreciate it.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into every superintendent of schools, whether they in fact are going to cancel school, or whether they have a delay of opening, or even an early release from school. And most of the time, it's 100% of the time, it's around the safety of children.
Right.
The pieces that go into that decision are, in fact, what is the conditions of the schools themselves with our own crews and our own ability to clear the sidewalks, clear the parking lots, do the appropriate sanding or salting, et cetera. The next place is with the Department of Public Works and with the mayor's office. And so consequently, that communication has to take place as well. The third piece of communication is through not only our Director of Property Services and the mayor's office and the Public Works Department, but also in conjunction with the police department, because they're out there on the roads. They see potential accidents and slippery conditions, et cetera. And a lot of times, it's not the amount of snow, or it's about what are the conditions of the roads. We have to remember that we have a large amount of student body members who drive cars to and from school as well. We have a timing by which we notify parents also has to take into, we take that into consideration, because we've got so many parents that need to provide daycare for their children. So all of this information, in fact, at times becomes a little sketchy because we're relying on forecast. We would like to let the parents know earlier, and our teachers and staff, whether we're going to have school or what is the situation with regard to early release or with a delay of opening. The reality is that we try to wait as long as possible. And sometimes when we do that, that gives notification later to the parents.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to do it early. We try to take into account numerous forecasts from many, many, many sources. Also, this really isn't done in a vacuum 99% of the time. I'm in contact with 7 or 8 different superintendent of schools as to what they are doing. Because when we do this, we have to take into consideration our tri-county students. We have to take into consideration parochial schools that we provide transportation to as well. So all of these pieces come into the equation.
Right.
This last storm a week ago, which was Monday night going into Tuesday, that was easy. We all knew what the situation was going to be. What was troublesome for us is that we have a large amount of our students who walk, and that requires our sidewalks to be completed, but to be completely shoveled or plowed. But in this city, because we have so many people commuting, we have to take care of our roads first. The sidewalks are always second. I can't have students walking to school in the roads. And so consequently, as much as I think the city does the best possible job they can with what they have, and I'm not running that show, the reality is when I get the notification that 2/3 of the sidewalks are not able to be used, that's not a hard decision for me.
Yeah.
That's why I communicated that to Chairman Murphy, that we will not be having school on Thursday. Hopefully we would on Friday. It wasn't the situation on Friday. And a lot of pressure gets placed on you when you're the only school department that in fact is not having school. But that was the case with our neighbors today. So you didn't have North Attleboro didn't have school either today. And I believe Norton didn't have school as well.
Yeah. So I think thank you. I think that does provide an important context and sort of to give people a sense as to exactly what that decision entails. It requires consultation with neighboring school districts. It requires consultation with the municipal government, and then at the end of the day, you're factoring in all of that information. But the determination comes down to, is it safe for students to go to school? Now, there are some variables that distinguish our community from some of our neighbors. We do have, as based on the information that's been provided to me, a higher walker population. We have more walkers, therefore there are more sidewalks that are at issue, and we need to that needs to factor in. So it should not be surprising, I don't think, that there are times when Attleboro could have school cancellations that extend beyond those of neighboring districts. I think that one sort of piece of frustration that I have felt, and I suspect other members of the committee have felt, and I suspect they've told me, so I know that they felt, is when the question is asked about, well, why isn't school out, and the answer from a variety of officials is because it's not safe. That will always be the case. If it's not safe, students will not be in school. The superintendent knows that. I think all of our stakeholders know that. There is a fair question, I think, when Attleboro is the last to go back, as to why is it that it takes longer for Attleboro to be safe, to have those sidewalks cleared. As I said, we've got more walkers, we've got more sidewalks. That's going to be part of it. As to whether or not there are decisions that could be made by the municipal government that could potentially expedite students' return, I think those are fair questions that are being raised in the community. They are, frankly, not questions for the school department. I don't think anyone is questioning the diligence with which the municipal government went to work, and the people, the DPW, who probably worked over 24 hours straight. I mean, we're grateful to them, not just as a school department, but as a community. But whether or not there are decisions either at the appropriation level or at the policy level that could potentially bring students back to school sooner, I frankly don't have the answer, and I don't think it's that this is the forum in which we can determine that answer. It's not a school policy question. It's a question for the municipal government. And at the end of the day, like most decisions, it's probably going to be a question as to exactly how much does the community want to spend to clear sidewalks or whatever else needs to be done. And again, this is not the body that makes that decision. It's the decision that holds our administrators accountable for making sure students are safe. And that's just one of the variables that they have to factor in. That if the sidewalk's not ready, then the kids don't go back. Mr. Withers?
Yeah, when were the schools themselves, the facilities themselves, ready to go? Because I know at first that what you heard was the schools aren't ready and the sidewalks aren't clear, and then the schools were apparently ready, but the sidewalks weren't ready till last night, presumably.
Our schools were ready last Wednesday to open for Thursday.
Wednesday night they were ready.
Wednesday night they were ready, and even with the new storm of yesterday, at 7 o'clock this morning for 3.5 hours, I visited every single school, every parking lot, drove through every single one, checked out all of the sidewalks to and from schools, etc. I would have to give our property services department and Jason Parento an A+ for the condition of our schools. The sidewalks that we're responsible for, the parking lot conditions, the foyers going into the schools, etc. I thought our guys did an absolutely tremendous job for our schools. The 2-hour delay of opening really assisted us, however, because now we could do the last minute pieces of salting appropriately and some of the last minute cleanups. So I knew that I had given them that time. That really was the icing on the cake, and our schools really looked real good.
Mr. Withers?
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on something you said, Chairman Murphy, and maybe add to it a little bit, and you might agree or might not, but what's can be frustrating to me is that I agree we shouldn't necessarily be comparing ourselves versus North Attleboro or Mansfield or Norton, because we do have more walkers, but and I don't know this for a fact, but I would seriously doubt we have the most walkers in the state, and to be the only district that doesn't have its sidewalks ready, fine, maybe North can be ready before us, but
Yep.
we're not unique throughout the Commonwealth, and even in parts of Rhode Island. So
Yeah, no, it's a very fair point. We weren't late to go back just as compared to our neighbors. We were late to go back, period. What would have to change in order for that to occur? I frankly don't know the answer, and like I said, I think it's a decision for other governmental entities to make. I think that at the end of the day, the people most affected by this are the school district families, and so it's understandable that they would want to hear from the school committee as to why it was their kids were home for a week. I can understand that. But no, you're absolutely right that to a certain degree, I think all of us in leadership positions have to ask the community to be patient, but we also have to listen, and when the questions that are being raised are reasonable ones, like why were we so late, I think that we need to acknowledge that legitimacy, and my hope is that those questions are raised in the proper forums. My question, and I appreciate that. I think Mr. Parento has earned a lifetime A+, so I don't even know if we need to evaluate him on a storm-by-storm basis at this point. But with regard to today's delay, I know there have been some concerns outside of the sidewalks, which I was going to ask, but it sounds as though, in your estimation, the sidewalks were sufficiently clear for the walker population. Is that an accurate statement? Or?
Some could have been better.
Okay.
I had written down a list of a few that I forwarded to the mayor immediately, and that was around 10:15 this morning.
Okay.
And those sidewalks were in fact done with the major blizzard.
Yep.
But you could tell that they were not done for the Monday.
For the follow-up.
Blizzard. So consequently, when I did another drive-through to the schools late in the afternoon, all of those that I had questioned were completely done. And other areas that I had concerns about at one time, those snow removing apparatus were going up and down those sidewalks
Okay.
in the major thoroughfares.
Okay. That's good to know. I think that's one part of the equation that we needed to look at tonight. I think that there have been and there should be questions with regard to bus stops, which are obviously separate and apart from the walker areas. What is our sense as to the state of the bus stops throughout the district?
I had received, as I was going through all of the schools this morning, and I was in direct contact with Mr. Parento as well, we had other people receiving information and messages. For example, we contacted the bus company and asked the bus drivers for specific areas or bus stops that needed some work or whatever, so we got that list from them. At the same time, our secretaries in our schools not all, but when they did receive information with regard to bus stops that could be opened up larger with the amount of kids, et cetera, all of that information was forwarded to the mayor's office immediately.
And to DPW?
And which consequently would go to Jason Parento and DPW. So
Okay.
they had that information.
And I think it's important that Jason Parento be kept in the loop as much as possible, but at the end of the day, Jason Parento is going to be responsible for our properties and
Correct.
not to the bus stops throughout the city. So I would just ask that as those areas are identified by parents or frankly by students or by bus drivers who oftentimes are sort of our eyes and ears throughout the community with situations like these, that information be forwarded to the mayor's office, to DPW, and frankly to the police department, so that way we can make sure that any entity that is in any way related to student safety has all the information that we have. Any other questions with regard to the cancellations or today's delay or how going forward? Because again, the forecast is not perfect coming in the coming days, as I understand it. So I think that it'll be that much more important for our administrators to make sure that information flow continues. Mrs. Sawyer, then Mrs. Scales.
As part of your drive-through, did you go through South Washington Street in South Attleboro?
I did.
Okay. Because I noticed that, well, in the morning when I leave for school, the high schoolers are out on the streets, and I noticed that on my route, all the high schoolers stand by Hess, and that intersection wasn't plowed at all. And as of today, it wasn't done either.
When was the last time that you actually
Went that way?
Yes.
On my way to here,
Okay, and was it done?
no.
Okay, I will make sure that goes back to the mayor's office
And
as well.
actually, where the crossing guard stands at the intersection of Brown, just that was done, but none of the sidewalks leading up to the crossing guard was done either. So that could be an issue. I mean, the kids can cross, but they can't walk to the crossing guard.
Yeah, I think part of the concern, what I received from the mayor's office, when we had two sidewalks that are usually utilized, the most important thing was to get one of them in operation as we went through the town first. That's why we had the same problem on Rome Boulevard. I need both sidewalks to be done, going to and from. I don't want to have middle school children from Brennan walking down Rome Boulevard and the road. But the other side over near Highland Country Club, in fact, was done. And so we sent a message to all the principals today to make an announcement in the schools that the students need to, when they can, they need to utilize the sidewalks as much as possible, because it would be convenient to walk into the road.
Yeah, I mean,
And I
I
don't
think,
want to do
I think
that.
the message from the principals to the students has to be, don't sidewalks, period. Not just when it's convenient. I
Correct.
mean, so, and this goes for committee members, for community members, for anyone else within earshot. If you see areas that need more work, please bring them to the attention of, if your building administrator is who you know to contact, bring them, go that route. I'm sure our building administrators will know to send it to our central administration and on over to City Hall. And again, clearing of sidewalks, crosswalks, that's fairly far away from our scope of authority and what the policy-making body of the school system, certainly this policy-making body of the school system, would like to be focused on. However, at the moment, we've got a situation that we need to make sure is being given its proper attention. It's not in any way second-guessing or criticizing the work that's being done by the Department of Public Works. But in a world where school has been out for a week, this is something that the governing body of the school system needs to turn our attention to. And hopefully we'll be able to help with the flow of communication and get the situation resolved as quickly as possible. Mrs. Scales?
I just want to say, I know making that decision is a tough one. I don't envy you at all, but just thank you for making those phone calls at night. It's a big difference from in the past, from what we've had. It's a big help for the families in getting there, like you said, the daycare, and just their lives in order for the next day. So
Yeah.
it's a big help.
Thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, and again, there'll be no action taken tonight with regard to contingencies, but I do think because we have reached a point where contingency planning at least needs to be taken into consideration, frankly, at the moment, we are not out of days in which we can have school. June 30th is the last day that we can have school. It's the last day that we would have school. And there have been years, I'm told, that the Attleboro schools have gone to school until June 30th. We have discussed in previous contexts that it is generally our preference that students not go to school throughout June. Some of us would argue that the sooner they're out in June, the more productive and the better sort of educationally it is for them. But June 25th is late. I actually think it's the exact date that the students were dismissed this previous school year. So at the moment, I don't know that there be any action that would be warranted. However, we're running out of time. There's no question about that. And since we're only in early February, it would be in our interest to at least be mindful of what the potential contingency plans would be. We have 2 school vacations that are scheduled between now and the summer, both of which have either a federal or a state holiday in those vacations. So it's a total of 8 days that are, it probably would not be accurate to say that they're at our disposal, because as I said, there are some processes that we would need to go through if we were to exercise that option. But it's something that I think that, given the fact that if another storm comes up, it could come up on short notice, and it may require the committee to take action more rapidly than maybe we would like. And so in light of that, I thought it would be worth entertaining a discussion as to what committee members feel would be a preferable options if it comes to the point where we need to exercise them. I will say, and I really can't emphasize this enough, anyone looking to make a decision with regard to this that is going to please everyone, it's probably a discussion worth sitting out. That will not happen, okay? We all know that there are individuals in the community that feel very strongly that there's an obvious choice, and probably within their neighborhood there are individuals who feel there is in fact an obvious choice and it is the opposite of whatever the first group thinks. That's the way it goes. That's life in a position of leadership, and so if there are comments or questions from the committee to the administrators, now would be an appropriate time for them to be voiced. Mr. Witters.
So do we have 2 or 3 days? I've heard both.
2 or 3 days in June.
Left.
Right now, school ends Thursday, June 25th, leaving Friday the 26th, Monday the 29th, and Tuesday the 30th.
Okay, so we do have 3.
Yes. So you've got a 3-day window in June, and you've got the to the degree that there's an urgency to this. I mean, one of these, if one of the options were that were to be considered was a reduction in the February recess. That's a decision that at the very latest we would want to make at our meeting scheduled for next week, February 9th. I would be uncomfortable making it any later than that.
And by asking this question, I'm by no means endorsing the
Yep.
option, but are Saturdays an option as well?
You know, it's a fair point. I guess I had, as someone who enjoys a good Saturday, I guess I just overlooked that.
Right.
There was a neighboring district that I understand did exercise the option in recent years. I'm told that attendance was not particularly robust.
Right, I mean, I think we present a whole slew of problems that, is different from the vacations, but I just wanted to make sure I knew for sure
Sure.
it was.
Yep. Mrs. Scales.
Would tacking on minutes before and after? be-
My understanding is that the regulation requires 180 school days, and so we are grateful for the fact that a half day or a delayed start does not chip into it, but tacking on minutes will not.
Okay.
Mrs. Sawyer.
From almost 99% of the parents that have contacted me, they've all stated the fact that we should work with the February vacation.
Meaning take days away?
Take days away or do away with.
Ms. Singer.
I've
I don't
heard
know how
that
other
same
people-
sentiment, simply because they have been out for a vacation, basically, over the last week. And then to only be back to school for, 8, 9 more days and then be out again for another week is, disruptive both to their learning environment. And then, again, the parents feel, from the parents that I've heard from, feel that February vacation is something that they're willing to, I think they'd be accepting of that.
Sure. Mr. Storrs.
Looking at a memorandum from 2011 where we had similar concerns, the Saturdays is definitely one of the things that is possible, but I would not recommend that. My belief right now is, we have a calendar that has the 5 days. We're at that point. That's, not ideal, but it is, it's not an emergency at this point. We still have another 3 days in June, which I think would be, in my opinion, the preference over taking away vacations that people have. Some people out there, I'm sure, have spent money and time and what have you to set up personal family vacations. And, although maybe the majority of people wouldn't be affected by taking days away from a February vacation or an April vacation, there's definitely people out there that would. And in some ways, barring an emergency where this became a little bit more out of hand than it already has, it would be somewhat unfair to create a situation where those students would not be able to be in school, or the choice is give up the vacation to be at school or miss school.
Yeah.
Again, if things get worse, which I hope they do not, of course, that's a different situation. But where we are right now, I don't think warrants that level of decision-making.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a fair point. I mean, the reality is we are not at this point absolutely forced to do anything. I think that there's the two concerns are, one, it will only take another day or two until we are absolutely forced to do it. And then the question is, which would have been better? Would it have been better to chip into April, or would it have been better to chip into February? I think Ms. Singer's point that from an educational standpoint, which I hope will drive this decision and any other, there's already been a disruption now. To take out April, essentially we would be sending kids to school for something like 10 or 11 weeks, consecutive weeks, from whenever the snow stops or February break until summer. And the only other point is that I am confident that somewhere out there are families who have booked vacations for that last week of June, assuming that we wouldn't have school all the way up until July 1st. Again, I'm not endorsing an idea at this point either. I think that it goes to the point that no matter what happens here, including if we do nothing, someone's going to be unhappy. That's just the way it is. Mr. Withers?
So, would there be a way, and this is probably a question for the administration, assuming we decided, whenever we made a decision to take a few days from February and take a few days from, or take a few days from April vacation, there are going to be students, there are going to be staff and teachers who have already booked their vacations and presumably will not be there. I mean, for students, is there a way that, where those absences count against them? I mean, how would that, play into the whole, you only get so many absences before you're failing a class, or it affects your transcript even?
I've been in situations similar to this before, and the school committee, in fact, has created almost like a policy for that particular moment of time.
A waiver.
By which a waiver, from school committee policy for that piece. What comes with that is obviously the inconsistency that people will view that by, and where other people have had other legitimate excuses according to what the student is saying or the parents, and we have said, no, that's not a legitimate excuse for absence. So it has been done, not without some controversy associated with it. But it's something that will have to be considered.
I mean, the one point, and I think, while this is not exactly this whole conversation, which I have put on the agenda and am currently facilitating, is not exactly in line with our basic agreement that commits the committee to focusing on the long-term, big-picture objectives that will have a positive educational impact for the community. What I would say is one of the uses of these conversations is, on occasion, a point can be raised that is worth us sort of examining a little bit. And the one thing I would just say to that is, if in fact students have what we deem to be legitimate reasons why they're absent, then we should be looking at exactly how do we apply waivers in those cases, regardless of whether or not it's because they had a family vacation scheduled or because they just have, as we've just acknowledged, a legitimate reason for being absent. So I just think it's important that we always keep in mind the need for flexibility when it comes to governing a school system of 6,000 kids. But again, that's not particularly on topic. So any questions that are on topic? Mr. Larson's always on topic.
Let's not go there, but I personally think we're too close to the February vacation calendar for both the staff and the students to be changing any of that timetable at this point. I mean, we still do have days, and I think the other real possibility, I mean, it is February. We could vote to have school during that week of February vacation. We could have additional snow days during that vacation where we're trying to have school. Had we been on vacation, we wouldn't have been in that situation. So, I mean, the plus side of being on vacation that week in February is you can't have a snow day. Just another possibility.
That is true.
That's a good point.
That is true.
So,
Mr. Withers, I saw a hand.
This is just my pensive look.
Pensive look. And we all have a pensive mentality right now because, again, clearly, and I understand, I'm sure there are some individuals who would like us to take quick action. Just to clarify, and I can't emphasize this enough, we do not have the option of taking a quick action tonight. That option is not on the table, okay? Even if there was a majority of the school committee, a consensus, an overwhelming majority of the school committee that wanted to do X tonight, it would not be an option, okay? There are processes that we need to go through when a change of this nature is contemplated. I think that, we will certainly see how the next few days play out. We'll see how the weather that's forecast for later this week, what happens there. And then certainly, at least with regard to February, we'll have a clearer indication by next week, I think. And the committee is set to meet on Monday, February 9th. For those who will say, well, that's going to be even more inconvenient for families by waiting that period of time, I would just say that the reality is, I think, one, if families have plans for February vacation, they're probably already made. Two, I suspect there's a sizable demographic within that group of families that their plans are going to be executed regardless of whether or not we decide to claw the students back for a couple of days. So while I completely agree with the sentiment that this has a significant impact doing something this late, I don't think that impact is going to change in any meaningful way between now and February 9th. If there were, maybe we'd be doing something different, but as I said, our options are pretty limited anyway. So it may be too late right now. That's a very fair point. I just don't think it's significantly worse by waiting until we can legally do it. Mr. Withers?
Is anything being done or going to be done kind of behind the scenes to get the balls rolling before February 9th in case we do need to make a decision? I'm just thinking, what
Yes.
if the storm hits, we can't have school on Friday or next Monday, it looks like there's another storm. Will we be able to potentially take action
Yes.
if the committee wants to?
All right. Okay, any other questions or comments about the fallout from Winter Storm Juno? Mr. Storrs?
The last point I would say, beyond the February, because obviously if that was the decision, the timeline isn't there. But this discussion is something that I think contingency in place is appropriate. Possibly maybe sending that down to the curriculum subcommittee, I would imagine would be the most appropriate. We've had discussions before with Mr. Sawyer about the concept of the 2 vacations combining into one. I know we've had that discussion, but it seems like that would be an appropriate place to maybe discuss possible contingencies
Yeah, I mean, I
beyond
think,
what we're talking about for
well,
February.
I think that in terms of the long-term planning of the district, which is really what this institution of a school committee is equipped to handle, it should, the whatever plan we're going to make should be driven by our teaching and learning objectives. And so the curriculum and instruction subcommittee is certainly an important vehicle by which we develop those goals, in which we vet those goals, and which they ultimately come up to the governing body. In this instance, I don't foresee this discussion taking place at the subcommittee level, because even if this is not something that we're talking about next week, it's still going to qualify under an urgent heading, and I would imagine that the discussion will just take place here. I don't frankly know when the curriculum subcommittee is meeting next, but I do think that calendar issues generally, and whether or not, for a variety of reasons, we should be thinking differently about when we schedule vacations. I do think that discussion would be appropriate, and I think, and frankly, I know that it's already going to be incorporated into some of the strategic planning work that's going on. You can't talk about what are long-term learning goals for the district without talking about when do we think students should be in a classroom learning, and certainly, hopefully, we hope they're learning when they're outside of the classroom, but that's got to be part of that conversation. And again, that's really what we should be focused on. We should be focused on long-term, what type of calendar is best for our students, what type of district do we want to be. But on occasion, our hand gets forced, and that certainly has been the case this week. So any other comments or questions? Okay, great. Okay, so now we'll move on to the final agenda item. And Mr. Furtado, if you could join us. Our final agenda item for the public portion of our meeting is an item that has been discussed at the policy subcommittee level. I believe there was, I honestly don't know the last time it was discussed at this level, but it would have been discussed on January 26th, and that is the potential reforms to the fee-for-service program in our transportation system. The policy subcommittee has first talked at a concept level on January 21st, and some sort of basic principles were outlined. It was our hope that on January 26th we would be able to essentially make sure that we used the more public and high-profile forum of the full committee to make sure that the community is aware that there are certain changes that are being considered. Unfortunately, that meeting was canceled, And then the policy subcommittee meeting was also, the next policy subcommittee meeting was also canceled due to snow. So essentially, I wanted to give either Mr. Withers or Mr. Furtado the opportunity to speak briefly about this topic. I anticipate that we will have a further discussion on February 9th. And at some point, the weather will allow the policy subcommittee to meet again and to make any final revisions to the language that's currently under consideration. And then we will go from there in terms of next steps. But Mr. Withers or Mr. Furtado, do you have anything you'd like to add, or
Well, I would just say that
if you could add it for another like 90 seconds, that would be great.
90 seconds, okay. So before became experts in snow removal, you'll remember a few months back. we had
Probably
the
some in the community that don't think we are.
Yeah, sorry.
As
Well,
their kids have been out for a
tonight
week.
we've become experts in
Yeah.
it. So we spent a lot of our time in September on transportation issues, and we had some trouble at the end of the year getting the transportation off and running. And I think we took it upon ourselves to make sure that doesn't happen again. And one of the things that we discussed was the fee-for-service program and how that, as it existed, was causing problems in that we were getting the data too late, we were getting the lists together too late. How could we make it work better from an administrative standpoint so that the community would know what the bus stops were, who were on the buses sooner, and so our administration would have the lists in place earlier to make sure that when we hit the ground running, whenever school starts, we're ready to go, and all the problems are getting worked out over the summer rather than the first few weeks of school. As a result of that, a concept that was created and discussed at the policy level, and I think in theory was supported by the policy subcommittee, was to, and everyone has this, correct?
I think only the policy
okay.
subcommittee, of which we have only a fraction of our members.
So, was to revise the fee-for-service program so that essentially what happens is that anyone who is in the mile radius, mile radii in the various school levels that's eligible for fee-for-service gets into fee-for-service if they pay the fee. There's no more wait lists. If you pay the fee and you're on a wait list, then eventually you'll get in. If you're within the prescribed radii for the various schools, you're in if you pay it. Walkers no longer are eligible for buses going forward, but everyone will know sooner, that they're eligible, and they'll be able to start on the first day of school.
And can I just add one point?
Yeah.
In the Walker zone would be contracted, and so based on the current numbers that Mr. Furtado's office has produced, the number of individuals who currently receive transportation, they're paying for it, but they receive transportation, who would no longer be eligible are, I believe, a couple of dozen students at most. And even that doesn't take into account students within that zone who might appeal for transportation due to safety considerations, which once we take that chunk out, it's conceivable, I would imagine, that there would be no students detrimentally affected in the sense that they currently have a way to ride the bus to school, and which, by the way, they're not entitled to it now, but generally speaking, we are able to service the Walker population. Under this plan, the zone is contracted, you take into account the safety considerations, and it's conceivable that no students would be detrimentally affected in the sense that they currently are able to take the bus, and next year they would not be able to. There would be a population of students who currently could ride for free, who would have to pay the fee, although there'll also be some students who would have to pay the fee, but now might be free because we would expand the entitlement from kindergarten to kindergarten and first grade.
And to follow up on that, the proposed change in the mileage would be, well, first, right now all kindergartners are allowed to take the bus for free. We would increase that to kindergarten and first grade, and then grades 2nd through 4 outside of a half mile are able to ride the bus. If they're over a half mile and under 2 miles, then they would be eligible for fee for service. Okay, so that 0.5 to 2, you're able to ride the bus, but you have to pay a fee.
And I'll just point out one quick change there. That change is going, expanding the fee-for-service zone on the outer edge from 1.5 miles to 2 miles, making it 2 miles uniform across the district. The crux of the change there is that if you're fee-for-service now, you're probably fee-for-service next year. The difference is we are telling you we're going to have a seat for you on the bus, and you will not have to wait, and we will not have to develop the routes based on availability and capacity. We'll build the system with you in it, you being the fee-for-service rider, and therefore, from an administrative standpoint, the routes will be able to be developed approximately 2 months earlier, and we will have the summer months to essentially troubleshoot and identify any potential problems. Is that a fair characterization, Mr. Furtado?
And then for middle school and high school, it would be the same for those two levels. Over a mile, you're eligible to ride the bus. A mile to 2 miles, it's fee for service. Beyond 2 miles, then you're entitled to ride the bus for free. And everything would stay the same as if you're receiving free or reduced lunch, you're entitled to
Not have to
reduce,
pay.
not have to pay, exactly. And so that's the thought process to ease it. We had thrown around a few ideas, one of which was eliminating fee for service entirely, and whoever gets to ride the bus rides the bus for free. Weighing the administrative benefits versus the loss of revenue when our transportation budget has troubles as it is, we decided there has to be a way that can benefit both sides of that equation, and this is what we came up with.
Yep.
I should say this is what for the most part Mr. Furtado came up with, and in consultation with us. Anything you want to add?
No, that's very good.
I know it's longer than 90 seconds, but
Well, no, it turns out I didn't need that long to get my soda out. So, Mr. Larson.
And if you don't have the answer now, if you could just let us know at another time. But at the elementary school level, where you're going to go from the outside fee for service, which is currently 1.5 miles, and you're going to go to 2. So there's, in theory, there would be people that are in that 1.5 miles to 2 that are currently getting the bus for free, that next year would be paying for it through the fee for service. Do we have any feel for how many people that impacts, or if you don't, if you could
No,
just
we,
let us know?
we looked at that. What we have is data on all of our students right now as opposed to bus riders. So we've gotten, we requested from Bloom their software can provide riders by those increments. And they're in the process of doing that. It's supposed to be done this week, but I don't know if the weather has affected that or not.
It's affected
But
everything
we'll
else.
have,
so.
we'll have a number for you.
It would just be good to know what that number is before we make the final decision.
Yeah. When this, again, when this arrives at the policy subcommittee again, now that there's actual language that's been drafted, the administration has been asked to present what is the full impact. So what is the potential ridership impact? What is the potential financial impact? The way this has been cobbled together is we think that those impacts are minimalized. We frankly think the biggest difference is we've got the routes developed months earlier, and we can get them published earlier, and we can troubleshoot earlier, and we therefore don't have our normal opening day crisis that we've sort of become accustomed to. Just in terms of the principles that we're trying to incorporate into this, it's first and foremost, statistically speaking, the safest way to get to school is on the bus. We want to acknowledge that and keep as many students on the bus as possible. In addition to that, it's the most efficient way to get to school because the buses generally get them on time, and we want students there on time to start class. The third is the financial impact that we need to be responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollars, and even though the appropriation doesn't come from this body, we need to be mindful that we don't have an endless well of municipal funds, and we need to respect that, and we think this is a fiscally responsible plan that ultimately, when you factor in the fact that we are retaining the somewhat modest but legitimate source of revenue that comes in for fee-for-service, that only helps. And I think, is that a fair characterization of what we're trying to incorporate in? And then certainly we want to minimize the impact of just any change. I think there's a fairly broad consensus that this is an aspect of our school system that could use some change. And I think that, we need to acknowledge that. And that's, hopefully we've come up with something that will minimize any type of detrimental impact, simplify the system, and hopefully make it more efficient going forward. So, Mr. Withers?
And just to touch on something you were saying at the beginning, and kind of almost in response to Mr. Larson's comment, the biggest impact that's going to be felt across the community is that if you're eligible to ride the bus, either free or for fee-for-service, you're eligible day one, period. I mean, that's the biggest impact, rather than the waiting list and not getting on for 2 months and changing routes. I mean, we looked at numbers of students in general in the areas. We didn't look at the riders, and the impact was smaller than I would have thought it would have been. So I think, I'm comfortable saying the biggest impact will be that everyone is eligible to ride the bus right away.
Mr. Storrs and Mrs. Scales?
Very much support the fact that we'll know on day one who's transporting and who's not. But looking at the old policy compared to what I believe you explained, I just want to verify some things. Currently, it's just kindergarten students are transported as a general, and you're saying you're going to increase that to kindergarten and first.
Correct.
So it is, under the current language, the absolute entitlement. The term we're using for the fee-for-service is a paid entitlement, because you're entitled in the sense that you'll have a seat, but not for free. And so it's a paid entitlement. The current entitlement is just kindergarten. The thought behind expanding that to first grade is that we want to minimize the population of individuals who are detrimentally affected, in the sense that they
That walkers now have to walk.
Exactly. And right now, the way our policy is set up, it's not an entitlement, but because we have historically wanted to put as many students on the bus as possible, we've kept those wait lists going, and so eventually students get on the bus. The other factor, frankly, is that I think we all think that the line between kindergarten and anywhere is somewhat arbitrary in terms of when is it a child able to safely walk to school. Frankly, it would, personally, I'd rather push that line even further up, but we've got a number of issues that we're trying to balance, and so at the end of the day, it's really about keeping that scope of people detrimentally affected as narrow as possible.
So if I can, looking at grades 2 through 4,
Right.
the rest of the elementary, currently it's beyond 1.5 is free, and
Correct.
between 0.5 and 1.5 is fee.
According to the policy, yes.
Yes,
However,
current policy.
because we let the walkers, we go so far into that list, it's generally, you're going to school, you can, if you want to ride the bus, you can ride the bus. But you do pay.
So the change there would be, it's going to be if you're beyond 2 miles.
Correct.
Instead of the 1.5,
Free.
it's free.
Yep.
So any students currently between 1.5 and 2 are not paying, they will start paying.
That is correct.
Okay. And then we're now going to allow students between 0.5 and 1.5 for fee. Where
0.5
currently-
and 2 miles.
Right, where currently it's 0.5 and 1.5.
That is correct. And
Okay.
part of that is, my understanding is the 1.5 is a holdover from a time in which there was a state law that was reimbursing districts for transporting students beyond 1.5. That state law went away some time ago. The policy never changed. It's 2 miles at the middle school and high school level, and the thought was to make it consistent in the hopes that, particularly when you have siblings who are going to school and there's a routine in the household, we'd like to make it as consistent as possible so people aren't confused what happens when the levels change.
And then for the middle school and the high school,
I'm sorry, I just had one other point. And there's also, we're not trying to make money off of the fee-for-service program, but in a world where our transportation budget is what it is and the fees are modest, and of all the complaints we have received with regard to transportation, exorbitant fees, frankly, have not really been one of them. We feel it's a responsible imposition to employ.
so for the middle and the high school, the 2 mile, which is currently in policy for free, is maintained.
Correct.
But the option for the fee for service goes from 1.5 down to 1.
Correct.
All right, so from that discussion, it sounds like we are very much increasing the possibility of who is eligible for fee for service. Now, from prior discussions, I understand the current fee for service doesn't come anywhere near covering the actual cost of transportation. Is that a fair statement? So potentially what I'm hearing is that we are possibly increasing the cost to the district by making this change. Not saying, I'm not saying pro or con.
Yep.
Either way, it's just financially, it sounds like there's a potential for an increase that I don't understand what that
Well,
might be.
the only potential increase from a budgetary standpoint would be if currently we're using 27 buses, is that correct?
28.
28, excuse me. If we were to utilize a
increase.
29th bus.
Right.
But we could use a 29th bus based on just our population of students next year anyway. There's 28 buses wasn't chiseled into a stone tablet at some point by a bolt of lightning that says that's how many buses you use in Attleboro. We determine how many buses we need based on how many students, and it's possible that we could go up to 29, but it may have nothing to do with this particular change. Mr. Furtado?
Well, and that increase, that perceived or potential is offset by being hard about walkers, which are not now.
Right.
Okay.
That's 100 students.
And that's why we know the maximum change could be the one bus, except that, like, there could be other changes, other variables could change, a development could open up. There could be any number of things that could happen that at some point Attleboro might need 29 buses, just like at one point we used 27, and I think at one point we used 26. I mean, there's no way of knowing. So that it is conceivable that could happen. I mean, one change, and I know that Mr. Furtado wants the community to know about this particular change, is that by putting the emphasis and prioritizing the more efficient administration of the system on the front end, as in not making sure that we've got everyone assigned to a bus and we're not scrambling around in the first week of school trying to get students situated, it is unavoidable that there will be a significant discrepancy in terms of the number of seats occupied in the fall versus in the spring. That is the case now. That is the case in school districts since time immemorial. But it's something that it can be frustrating for community members because they know they're paying. If you see a bus in Attleboro, in all likelihood you're paying for it. And when you see one going by that everyone seems to have, it's sort of a comfort class bus where everybody's got plenty of leg room and plenty of elbow room, that can be frustrating. But it's certainly not the case in the fall when you've got students, and feel free to not use the example, when we've got students that are crawling out of windows because everybody's riding the bus, and it's the hip thing to do. And so that's just something that I think we as a school committee need to take responsibility for and say to the community that that's part of that difference you see is the district running an efficient administration of the transportation system. And frankly, if we're doing our job, part of the reason the students won't be on the bus in the afternoon is because they will be enrolled in after-school programming at the middle school level, and they'll be staying until the late bus, which I hope is very crowded as well. Mr. Withers, did you want to?
Still pensive?
I feel like this is more relaxed. Mrs. Sturts.
It's just a follow-up point. So
Sure.
that's the financial concern. The other major concern, of course, is time. I know we have a policy that indicates 45 minutes from first pickup to the school. But if all of a sudden we're adding a half a mile's worth of stops, how many ever that is going to end up being, won't that ultimately add time that we're already maxed out on some bus stops, on some buses? Won't that create a concern?
Well, again, what we've done is this year particularly added stops ad hoc, independent of a rational laying out of bus routes. So the bus routes have to be defined by school committee policy. They cannot exceed 45 minutes. That'll drive what the system looks like. But this year, we were, kind of desperate straits and did things in a less comprehensive way than you'd like.
So the point is that a thoughtful approach should not pose a risk of routes
Right.
exceeding that 45-minute limit. And do we have many that are getting close to it now? Do we know?
I think we have a couple that are close, but the system's running pretty tight. We don't have buses arriving late. We don't have buses exceeding 45 minutes to, an hour and 5 minutes or something.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Withers.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but making this change with the figures we have now isn't going to dramatically increase the number of kids we have on the buses necessarily, because we're drawing the harder line with walkers, and we're not picking up the students that aren't entitled to it.
Correct.
So it's not a huge increase. So for cost and time purposes, it wouldn't necessarily be a major impact.
Mrs. Gales.
As far as the exceptions to the walker zone, those people due to safety reasons, I just want to emphasize that they really need to be told well in advance so that they can file for an exception as to the rule, when would they be able to know?
Well, again, we were hoping to have public hearings within the confines of the policy committee, so that the public could give some input, and then once all of the decisions are final, we would send out a notice to the community.
But I think in terms of the individuals who want to know whether or not they're an exception within the Walker Zone, they could appeal that anytime after the routes are published, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
that, our hope is July 1st
Yes.
for the publication of bus routes.
So then that was,
In the month of
that
July,
would
I
give
wouldn't say
them.
July 1st, but
What's that?
the month of July.
Well, isn't July 1st in the month of
July-ish.
July?
It's one of the possible days, yes.
It's good, especially if they go to school to June 30th. You just hand them on the way out the door.
Yeah.
And also, just to be clear, as far as our private schools that we transport, as far as how will their distance be calculated? Any differently, or how?
No,
would-
as it's been done historically, based on the location of the school, or, say, if it is in St. John's, it's always been centered on Willett. So we would keep that consistent so that parents don't wake up one day and they're getting transportation, and wake up the next day and they're not.
Okay,
So
so,
it'll be the same as it's been for, however long. It won't be changed.
okay.
So just going forward, so folks can understand what the sort of sequence from this point will potentially be. The policy subcommittee will have another opportunity to look through the language and to identify the particular, these various moving parts. There are some variables that could be changed. These don't, each component of this is not necessarily dependent on others. We could, for instance, keep the absolute entitlement limited to just kindergarten. But I don't think we should be identifying variables that we want to change until the administration's had the opportunity to present all the implications to each of those components in terms of both ridership and finances. Once that happens, given that this is an issue that the public has become so familiar with in recent years, I do think that it would be beneficial to give the opportunity for some type of public hearing. I don't want to open up a public hearing before we've had the opportunity to communicate to the community exactly what it is that we're talking about. There are always, when we deal with transportation issues, some who take a slice of the information and try to make a full pizza out of it. And that's not helpful. It's extremely distracting, and once we have this in the language that it's being considered by the full school committee, we've got to make sure that we publish it in a variety of mediums such that people can understand exactly all the different facets of this. I'm hopeful that that will happen over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and that the committee can adopt a policy change if we are going to do so by our March 9th meeting, which my understanding is that that's a workable timetable for the administration. Okay. Okay, so that, yes, Mr. Larson.
Just one other variable, because I know you've dealt with it all summer long, along with others, is if we're gonna send communications out to the community about this coming up, I think we should try to add some language in there about making sure that people register early for kindergarten. I know last summer, people were registering all during the month of August and then still expecting to have a bus route. I know I was in here towards the end of August and somebody was registering 3 days before Labor Day and was still hoping to have a bus, after Labor Day weekend. The more that we can try to encourage people to register early for kindergarten, that way, because we have to count those people in too, so.
And the efforts that are underway with regard to registration is going to be an agenda item this coming Monday, and probably every other Monday after that, so that we can try to promote that registration throughout the community as much as possible. I know there are some open houses that are coming up. I know there's been some publication in local media, but Mr. Larson's point is a very valid one, that it's something that we made a commitment in the fall, or I guess in the late summer, that if there's anything we could do to amplify our efforts toward reaching our prospective school community members, we would like to reach out to them. So, okay. So that's the conclusion of our public agenda tonight. The school committee will convene an executive session pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3 and 4, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining as an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the school committee, and to discuss the deployment of security personnel, devices, or strategies with respect thereto. The committee will not reconvene in open session. Second.
Second.
Mrs. Storrs?
Yes.
Mr. Withers?
Yes.
Mrs. Sawyer?
Yes.
Mrs. Scales?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mrs. Zito? Ms. Singer?
Yes.
Okay, we'll take a 2-minute recess and convene an executive session.
What time did the game start?
Today,
Yeah.
they canceled. They postponed it.
I knew that.
Usually not more.
Yep.
That's right.
Bill doesn't like the light,
Either one of them.
a light on it.
Well, every time I look down there, it's like,
So would it be rude of me to look at this?
The policy?
No,
Yeah.
it's,